Okay, why don't we start off with you introducing yourself?
Okay, my name is Samuel Webb Sr. At I was born June 21st, 1944. As a result, I feel as if I am halfway qualified to give my interpretation or rendition of from a black perspective of the 50s and the 60s. Now, my earliest recollection of racism would probably, for the most part, be when I started to elementary school, which was September 1950. I'm a kid that, for the most part, I was educated at home, ABCs, the basics, uh, you know. And being a black kid back then was a chore. Well, let's put it like this: it was a responsibility of parents, of relatives, to educate each and every member of the family on the do's and don'ts and the pros and cons of living in a segregated society. There was numerous restrictions, and you had to be aware of these. There was the lines that you couldn't cross. There were things that you couldn't do for fear of severe retaliation. Uh, I started to, my first day at elementary school, I got my two pencils, number two pencils in this tablet. This Big Chief tablet is what they call it, which every kid started out with. But the process that you went through, you had to be inoculated against. Back then, it was diphtheria. Diphtheria was rampart because of the water situation, purification, and what else. It wasn't a good a system that filtered water, so you had to be conscious and careful of the water you drank. And diphtheria was rampart was one of the uh, diseases that they hadn't got a handle on. Polio was another one. So starting to school, it wasn't like it is today where you had to get a series of shots and then records were kept. You would go to school and you would line up in this big auditorium, this big open auditorium, and you were lined up by alphabetical order, and they had this nurse who was Caucasian, a big woman, and she would I don't know, her bedside manners, as they would say in the medical world, wasn't exactly up to par because she would grab a youngster by the arm and go boom, 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 boom with the needle. Of course, it was yelling. Yeah. So, my last name is W. Starts with a W. I'm in the back of the line, and I witnessed this from a back of the line perspective. And I see all these kids going through it, and I'm petrified because I know my turn is coming.
Yeah.
And to this day, I have phobia with needles.
Hmm.
And it's directly connected with this situation. You were grabbed by the arm and pecked around, and then you couldn't scratch the scab, and it was just like cattle. I mean, you were herded cattle. You were herded in there. You get the number was done on you, and then you and crying was. I mean, hey, who cared about your crying? You was gonna get it done, and I think this was a really unsympathetic lady who was in the nursing profession in this white uniform. Presented a red flag whenever I saw it for I don't know how many years. Still haven't got over the needle phobia. Uh, but I mean, that's life. Now, going to school, uh, of course, this is the 50s, And segregation was a policy where we say, where society dictated separate but equal. But there was, I fail to see the equality in a situation where black kids got passed me down material, school material, books. Books were sometimes ragged, pages was torn, and the cover of the book where you put your name, sometimes you didn't have, it was all filled up. I mean, we were getting hand-me-downs. The curriculum was just basic. Uh, 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 and I feel like it wasn't because the teachers didn't care, but they had to ascribe to a curriculum that was dictated by somebody that was over them, and under the circumstances, they did the best that they could. Basically, I got a good education. I got a wonderful education under the circumstances. Of course, if we had updated books, our input of knowledge could have been vastly improved. But that again is one of the situations you face with when you exist or you live in a segregated society. Um, my neighborhood was mixed. As a result of segregation, you had a number of businesses. You couldn't sit in the downtown cafeteria, the soda stand. So black people created drugstores where they made this situation available. You had barbecue joints for blacks. You had movie theaters, and although we could see the same movies as our white counterparts, we had to go into the back door. If it was like 35, 40 cents, 50 cents for the Caucasians, then the blacks could go in the back door to cut rate price, transverse a number of stairs or an elevator, and we would be situated above. We would see the same movie, but we were in a segregated situation, and this is the way movies work. There were a few movies that were outdoor movies, and I'm sure a lot of people weren't aware of them, and it was a screen set up with a high, I'm trying to draw a mental picture. Okay, you got a high, um, tin fenced. You couldn't see through it. And there were seats that were bolted to asphalt. There was a projection room, and you would go into this movie theater for like a dime and see maybe a double feature, maybe two Western movies, a cartoon, the previews of coming attractions, and they had these situated. It was maybe 8 or 10 in the city of San Antonio where are located. So the hub of activity, we had black barber shops, we had black beauty shops, we had black places to eat, we had black juke joints where you went and got beverages. Of course, this is the way it was. But on each side of town was a hub of black activity where there was no segregation. However, you couldn't shop in these places. Of course, they didn't have clothing stores. If you had to ride public transportation, then it was noted that the front of the bus when you got on was reserved for whites, Caucasians, and the sign in the back said that the back of the bus was reserved for colored. And if you went downtown, you didn't have a place to use the restroom, so your parents could, in the 50s, could buy a dress, but a lot of them made their own. They knew their sizes because they weren't allowed to try on dresses. If you tried a dress on, then you had to buy it because no white patron would try a dress on that they felt like a black person would. It was stringent. I mean, the rules were followed to the T. I mean, you for the most part, you had to step aside for a Caucasian. If you were black, they always had the right of way. This was walking, this was driving, whatever. And a black parent had to start very early to educate their offsprings on how to survive in a segregated society
And when
as it
you
existed.
and when you say survive, do you mean just socially or actually survive?
Survive because you could get in trouble if you looked at a Caucasian, if you made eye contact with a policeman, or if you wasn't submissive when you went to buy things, uh, you had to call them Miss Such and Such, regardless of whether an adult had to call a kid Miss Such and Such or whatever. But you always had to be conscious of giving a respect and be in a submissive type situation if you didn't want to incur the raft of the power structure of the social norm that existed at that particular time. You
And,
had to know your position and you had to maintain and keep it.
and the punishment for these not following these rules was getting locked up and
Getting locked up, getting hit upside the head, getting verbally and physically abused. Uh, you could randomly get stopped on the street. You had to have an ID at 18. This was mandatory, or you went to jail. There was restrictions on neighborhoods. If you was not a yard man, there were certain sections of the city that you were not allowed in under no circumstances. If you weren't a cleaning person, if you weren't a maid, if you weren't, it was just sections of town that you didn't go. You know, I mean, you gotta, you stuck out like a sore thumb, and you just didn't go. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, uh, the Supreme Court ruled that they had to desegregate. But of course, I'm living in the South, Texas being the southernmost state. It was the last state to secede from the Union during the Confederacy, and they held on and maintained through that segregation type policy until over in the 60s, where you could go in and eat and sit down and eat. But the law was passed, Supreme Court ruling was 1954.
so growing up in the 50s, you understood that these were the rules and that there was just no breaking them.
You had to subscribe to the rules that existed. And these rules had existed for hundreds of years. And you were fortunate. I mean, we had our own churches. I was fortunate enough to live and be raised in a neighborhood where uh, at one block, end of the block, was a church that I attended. And that same end of the block was a middle school, an elementary school, and a bus stop. So I had access to these facilities at an early age.
So getting out of the 50s, you got a little bit older and went into the 60s. And how old were you in 1960?
Okay, I started to high school in 1959. I was probably about 13. My birthday came in June. So I probably was 13 or 14.
Okay.
And I started to high school in 1959. Now, I went to a integrated high school.
Okay, so how was that experience different than? I mean, what changed for you? What was the
It
attitudes
was
between?
it was different because for the most part, a lot of Hispanics and whites had never went to school with blacks. They had never been socially involved with them. Uh, I think at that particular time, my brother started in 1957, so it was only, I think it was a dozen blacks going to this school at this time. So um, they kind of looked down upon you, so you had to study a little bit harder, and you had to show them that, look, I'm not a dunce. I mean, uh, I'm not an idiot. I can do this work. It's not something above my mentality.
Yeah.
If I involve myself in it, then I can make A's and B's.
Yeah.
But you had to constantly show that you were equipped with the same mental facilities
Mhm.
that every other human being that had sense was.
Yeah.
That you could grasp material and you could regurgitate it. And I mean, you had mental facilities that could dissect a material and that you could function like your counterpart.
Yeah. So it was really just trying to prove that you were equal to them.
Yeah. Socially
Hmm.
and mentally, you was equal. I mean, if given a level playing field, you could function
Yeah.
if given the opportunity. And that's in the 60s, the early 60s, let's say about 64, they kind of opened things up
Hmm.
where you could sit at the counters, you could go to the movies in the front door.
Hmm.
Hello, which was a first for me. You could
Yeah.
buy popcorn at the concession stand.
You couldn't do that before?
You couldn't do that before.
Wow.
You had this little cubicle with maybe 10 bags of popcorn and 8 candy bars, and this was it. I mean, in the black section.
So it wasn't equal. It wasn't separate but
It
equal.
wasn't. It was separate, but it wasn't equal.
Hmm.
And this is what was preached. Okay, well, I don't know why we have to desegregate because, separate and equal works. Separate and equal does not work
Hmm.
because separate equality, you're not gonna say, well, look, okay, we'll tear down these social barriers and just accept it. You're not gonna do it on your own. Now, where I lived, uh, it wasn't a lot of demonstrations like you're picketing, you're sitting down a lot because of the a small majority of black people in San Antonio and the large quality of Hispanics. Then the white was a minority at this particular time, but we had preachers and social activists that could go to a place and say, well, look, would y'all volunteer and desegregate because it is the law? And if you don't, we're going to protest. We're going to run away your customers. So it's best to go ahead on and do this. This is the law. Why don't you just go ahead on and do it? So we didn't have a lot of riots like you see in a lot of other places down south. And we are in the south.
Yeah.
Diehards that were not going to, you sit up and you're going to be submissive. Do not retaliate. You got spit on down in the south. You got mustard. You got condom, the mustard, ketchup, and everything. You got slapped. You got spit on. You got verbally brutalized because of the fact that you wanted equality. But it just took a time. You didn't get in our town, we didn't get the water hoses and the dogs and the clubs.
Mhm.
But it happened.
Yeah.
It happened. It was isolated incidents that still happen because a lot of people wanted to hold on to the old, the antebellum South, the way it was. The change is evolution over a prolonged period of time.
Yeah.
You got diehards that don't want to do it.
Nope.
Change is going to come. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, the Bible says, there is a season for everything. Changes occur. There's a season for planting. There is a season for, and it would behoove you to read Ecclesiastes because changes is going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
And I mean, you're saying, you wanted equal treatment. I mean, what exactly was your position on social equality?
My position on social equality was, if I saw my white counterpart go in a gas station
Mm-hmm.
to purchase gas, in a full service. It was a full service deal. Then it wasn't like it is today where you go in and you pump your gas. You drove up and the attendant would ask you, how much gas do you want? Could I check your tires? Could I check your coolant? Could I put water in your radiator? Could I wash your windshields? This is the type of situation you wanted that exists for the white counterpart, as opposed to the black counterpart going to a service station and asking them before you got gas, could you use the restroom? Because they would sell you gas, but you could not use restroom facilities. See? So all you wanted was the same type treatment that was melted out to your counterpart. If you're going to perform this service, I'm spending my money. It's the same color money.
Yeah.
Money don't change.
Yeah.
Denominations, If I'm going to spend my money at your service station, then I think that I should deserve the same type treatment. Check my oil. Check under the hood, my coolant. Check my tires. Check my tire pressure. This was general. This was acceptable behavior when you drove you sit in your car,
Mm-hmm.
and this was performed.
That's not asking so much.
That's not asking. I don't think that's asking a leg and an arm.
No.
All I'm asking is to treat me the way I act and the way you treat other people.
Yeah.
My white counterpart.
And I mean, of course, everyone
And
living in that situation felt the same way.
yeah, and now the part two question about my particular stance on achieving this equality was to let that go.
Yeah.
Was achieving my situation on achieving this equality. Now, I was not with MLK's peaceful resistance, nonviolent.
Yeah.
I'm more or less leaning toward the more radical, hey, we're gonna achieve this one way or the other.
Yeah.
If you spit on me, I'm gonna jab slap you, or I'm gonna retaliate.
Yeah.
You can't tell me, you can't sick a dog on me without me retaliating. You can't slap my female mom or my a female member of my family without me going off.
Yeah.
We can achieve this by force, but it's gonna be achieved. With MLK, and I admire the man, but I lean more toward the radical groups in the 60s, the Black Panther movement that walked around armed,
Yeah.
because it was legal, and especially the Weatherman, the Weather Underground.
So who were they?
Hey, this was a group of radical Caucasians, male and females.
So they were white men and women who were helping.
Yeah, educated, and what they were doing to perpetuate a change, they were robbing banks to finance this change. They were setting bombs off.
Wow.
A Big Brother was a enemy. The FBI, the CIA, the power that be. I mean, they really put their hands where their mouth was at, and I admire them for that. Now, I admire Martin Luther King for what he did, but I have a problem about the way he peaceful demonstrations. It's hard for me to take some of the verbal abuse that was melted out,
Yeah.
or some of the physical abuse that was melted out. I was more to the left. I had Chairman Mausel read book. I read about Marxism. I read about the communist doctrine. I wanted to go to Cuba and cut sugar cane. Actually, I was married at the time, and then my son was being born. My wife was pregnant. But I would have liked to went down and listened to Che Guevara and Castro.
So you felt like you wanted to connect to your roots, African.
Yes, I mean, see, I read someplace years ago, people think that Africans came over here and that they were permissive. I mean, they didn't care about being slaves. Some of these people were princesses. These was fighters. They died. There's an incident where Sin-Q, they took over a slave ship and killed everybody. And because they were slaving up and going up and down Boston Harbor for a while, and then they got caught and they went to jail. But they got sent back to Africa, Sierra Leone. But don't ever think that slaves were content with their plight.
I mean, who would be?
Yeah, I read a book once that said every good slave ought to run off once. And I think about Malcolm X. Malcolm's writing, he says, "Hey, when the master's house is on fire, the house in word would be trying to put it out. When the field in would be praying for a breeze. Burn it up. Burn it up."
Yeah.
Or H. Rap Brown, who was radical and militant, say, "Arm yourself. If you don't do nothing but get a BB gun with BBs in it, poison BBs. Protect yourself." I mean, this is war,
Yeah.
you know? You're being humiliated. You're being brutalized physically and mentally. If this is what it takes to perpetuate a change, then we got to do it. They burned down Watts. They burned down businesses. Caucasians would come into the black neighborhood with businesses and get rich off of them, but then they would go back to the upper middle class part of town. They deal with you on a monetary level, but socially, you were still nobody. So I got in trouble for my stance on racial injustice.
Yeah.
But that would be my position. To perpetuate a change, there have been coups, there have been governments overthrown, but you had to use physical means to achieve a lot. Hey, they overthrew the Indians by physical means. They killed the buffaloes. They slaughtered the Indians, Wounded Knee. I mean, the country was changed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it was.
So you felt that the thing that really, changed the civil rights movement was the militant movement.
I think the riots, the Watts riots, people were saying, "Look, we're sick of it. We'll burn everything up."
Yeah.
You know, if this is what it takes. I mean, it was one incident downtown where it was only one black high school in town, but they had this game on Wednesday, and their contribution to civil unrest was to just break out stores in the downtown area and run in and rip off the material, the shirts and whatever. I know a guy, some of the glass cut him, but they did start riots. You get people's attention when I looked at it as civil disobedience. So, if you're going to do something, then you got to have some type of crutch. This was my crutch. Okay, all I'm doing is perpetuating civil disobedience. It's not right. There's a law against it. The law is not being enforced. So we'll enforce it. And that was a stance that the militants took. Now, on the other hand, the nonviolent situation achieved a lot. But I think that you needed both particular situations to perpetuate this change, the nonviolent and the violent. So it's like, we got a situation here. The power structure to be looked at it. We got a situation right here, nonviolent, and they're trying to achieve an objective. And then we got a situation right here that's violent, that's trying to achieve a situation. So what do? Do we pick the lesser of two evils? It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Buckle under. Do what you got to do.
Yep.
So, Martin Luther King worn out.
Yeah.
And that's my take on it. That's my take on it.
So you felt that the nonviolence really just it only went so far.
It only went so far. I mean, you establish a fact that, look, I can't sit down at this counter and eat. We black people are not permitted to sit down in this counter and eat. But there is a law on the books that says I can. It's just not being enforced. Because in 1954, we're talking about this separate but not equal doctrine was wiped off the books. Supposedly. Supposedly. So, for all purposes and intent, it should have happened in the 50s.
Yeah.
So, the power that be, it took a time to get there. But if I feel like I'm not breaking the law by wanting to sit down and get a burger and a malt, and there is a law on the book that says I'm permitted to do this, then I'm gonna join in the civil disobedient crowd. I'm gonna be down with the civil disobedience, but I'm not gonna sit there permissive and let somebody talk to me any kind of way and brutalize me.
Yeah.
So I'll go another route.
So
There's consequences, but I did it. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I was wondering about the older black generations. What did they think about the civil rights movement? Was there mixed feelings
It's
or
mixed feelings. It's like they never knew another way of life, and to them it was go along and get along, you know. And they had been brought up to, it was a way of life. Look, if you don't want to get in trouble, do what master say, do what the power that be says. Big brother is right. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to rock the boat. My father didn't do it. I'm not going to do it. When my parents came from the rural, the country, I met my mom. My mom met my dad picking cotton because this is the way the black family supplemented their income by doing stoop labor, which was you go to school a certain time and at a certain period you stopped. They had large families, 7 and 8 kids, because the more kids you had, the more hands you had working. Everybody would stop. They would go out and pick somebody's field, harvest somebody's crop. This was money that they didn't have. Now they could raise their own poultry and their own beef and their own pork, but they needed some spending money. So to supplement their income, like my dad had a 4th grade education. He was an aircraft mechanic. He worked his way up from a janitor to cleaning airplane parts to being an aircraft mechanic.
wow.
But the reason he did this, he told me he dropped out of school 4th grade. You can read and write and everything. He was the oldest. He dropped out of school because he had to be a breadwinner. And then when it was time for him to go back to school, he was one of the tallest guys in class. And he didn't know what these kids knew that were too small to go to work. So they were in school, and he was out of place. He was displaced. So they moved from the rural area to the country. I mean, from the rural area to the city. My dad lived about halfway in between San Antonio and Houston, and he put applications in Houston and San Antonio, and he got one in San Antonio. So that's why we ended up there. But for us, we lived pretty comfortably because we were one of the few people that had a TV or a car. And this was like unheard of because there wasn't a lot of jobs for blacks. I mean, to get a car, to have a car, we traveled a lot. I went to California in 1950, and it was like another world because you could go where you wanted to go, eat where you wanted to eat. The TV was on all night. Our TV went off at like 10 o'clock after the news. It came on like 3. And this was a different world.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go outside of your comfort zone and you get assimilated into somebody else's lifestyle, then you find out, hey, what's up on this?
Yeah.
See? So you got a lot of people that migrated from California maybe to the South, and so they were instrumental in, hey, this ain't jumping off right.
Yeah.
So with their mentality, hey, we got to change this. See? So when people went up north to visit, when people went to other areas where segregation didn't dominate, then they saw how things were, and they weren't satisfied with their plight when they came back.
Hmm.
So this helped a great deal. Our black leaders, preachers, and respect. The preachers were always respected in the neighborhood. Went, look, why don't y'all voluntarily desegregate because it's going to happen, and why don't we just do it peacefully? Why don't we just all get along?
Yeah.
But that's basically the way it was.
Yeah. I mean, in the bigger picture, what do you think the pros and the cons of the movement were?
Well, that presents a dilemma because you can look at it from a number of different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at the sacrifice that was melted out to blacks who wanted to vote, who went through a strenuous process to vote, filling out a questionnaire, who the Ku Klux Klan killed because they wanted the right to vote. And then you see people that don't go out to vote. They don't even have income. They don't carry mine at all times. I mean, this is a God-given right. Why don't you have a voter's registration card? What would prevent you from having a voter's registration card when it's a God-given right?
Yeah.
And I feel good when I vote and they give you this little sticker, I vote.
Yeah.
I went to church and most of the seniors, they don't vote. My age group, it's like they got stagnated somewhere along the road. And that bothers me tremendously. I worry about that. But when we get back to the pros and cons, not straying too far off the subject, the pros are that you can achieve an objective through peaceful means, and you can also achieve that same objective through violent means. Because at the time, we were in an undeclared war, and as soon as black kids got out of high school, they went straight to Vietnam. See? But then you had a middle class and upper class that went to Canada, went to college, and they dodged this. See? But we lost a generation of blacks, and they had the draft.
Mm-hmm.
So it was mandatory for you to go. They don't have the draft. So now when you see a war, you don't see a whole lot of black faces. They live to learn.
Yeah.
If I ain't got to go, I ain't going.
Yeah.
I mean, hey.
I'm sure many black veterans have shared their experiences.
Yeah, I've talked to black veterans, and they talk about, hey, why would I go over there and shoot at Viet Cong? They never called me the N-word. And then America got into a war that in Southeast Asia, these people they virtually lived underground. They had hospitals and they had living accommodations, and so the bombs weren't that effective. And the reason is because they started fighting the French in 1954. They fought them to a standstill, and then America wanted to jump in. The same thing happens, and I'm not being anti-American. I'm just talking about a situation. In Afghanistan, those Afghans, they fought the Russians to a standstill. America provided them with weapons. I'm not being anti-American, but I'm stating a fact. They use those same weapons on us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have to question the powers that be that get us in these situations. We can't police the whole world. And that's the same type of atmosphere that existed during the Vietnam War. I had a brother who was drafted in the Marines. The Marines are frontliners. When you go in the Marines, you go in to fight. He got wounded in Chulai, and he get 100% disability. But he's not right in the mind. He's got post-traumatic stress syndrome. He do drugs. He's not functional. But, you know, I give him as much support as I can. But MLK didn't support it, the war. And it was a very unpopular, undeclared war. It was a lot of demonstrations in the 60s, you know, and I'm touching on, you know, the way things existed then. This is my primary purpose of trying to give my view. People could agree or disagree, but I'm giving you my view of the way the atmosphere existed to a guy that was 20-something years old at a particular time.
What what were your feelings towards the government at this time?
I didn't think the government was functioning right because they were over and you know, involved in a war in Southeast Asia. People were getting killed. The armament, the rifle. I mean, they hadn't ironed out all the kinks. These rifles were jamming on the Americans, and they couldn't use them. It was a lot going on. There was protest here against people getting. Why would we have any problem? I mean, we don't have a problem. What problem could propel us to go away over in Southeast Asia? And I mean, we people were coming back exposed to Agent Orange, which was a defoliant, and they still didn't get compensation. They had to fight and scratch for a disability. My brother, they first gave him 18%. It took him like 15 years, 10, 12, 15 years to get 100%. They came back amputees. They came back not right in the mind. They came back drug addicts. They came back post-traumatic stress. War is not, hey, they had this group, war. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. See, it's good for the Undertaker. That's it. I mean, war is terrible. I'm against war.
You felt like we had no business over there?
I don't feel like we had any business over there. And I'm not in the minority. I mean, that was, if you talk to people, especially if you had a family member, I talked to my brother about it, and they were lying about how it was over there. He told me. I was getting a magazine called The Leatherneck that was a conservative view of what was going on over in Southeast Asia. And he told me, hey, man, you can throw that away. That ain't the way it happened. This is the way it happened. I'm getting out of here on a medical discharge. And he got out on a medical discharge. But I got kind of, that right there was one of the focal points of the 60s. That war in Vietnam was also, I mean, it had to do with segregation because it was a disproportionate number of blacks over there fighting.
Yeah.
So, do you know that I wasn't straying off the subject at hand?
No, that's fine.
But it was a disproportionate number of blacks.
Did you feel like in the heat of the Vietnam situation, a lot of attention was being taken away from the civil rights movement, and
It was
so
until our leaders, MLK was one of them, and that's why the dirty tricks that FBI pulled on him. Hey, we've been, well, he was a womanizer. Let's see, he was in a situation where women liked him. He liked women. Okay, I'm not going to say he was a saint.
yeah.
And he had extramarital activities. They were taped, and they use this as a ploy to circumvent his involvement. in the civil rights, but he still held fast to his guns. One of his speeches, I want to be a drum major. Drum majors out front.
Yeah.
See, that's, you can
And they
probably
lead
get
the
that.
band.
They lead. Yeah. I've been to the mountaintop. Whatever happens, happens. And when I think about him, and he say, I might not get there with you, but I've been to the mountaintop and I saw over. Yeah, maybe it was a preparatory speech for death. But when I'm a deacon, and when I read the Bible, and Paul, which was Saul, was converted on the way to Damascus. He was blinded for 3 days, and he converted. He was a educated Roman who was, he would go out his way to kill a Christian. He was on his way to kill Christians when God struck him down, blinded him, and got his heart right. But he said, he's one of the greatest prophets in the Bible. Look, he was educated, so he was able before. And this is getting off the subject a little, but the Jews were considered God's chosen people, and in a sense that's true. He chose the Jews, but they were chosen to go out and spread the gospel. So when people say, I'm Jewish and he's God's only, well, you got Jews and you got Gentiles. But Paul was converted to bring the Jews and the Gentiles together. So, in other words, you don't discriminate against a Gentile because you're a Jew. You bring them together. So that was a form of discrimination, and that's why I put that in. I hope it don't clash with segregation. But Paul said he was in prison. Romans had him in prison for teaching the gospel. And he didn't know what his plight was, what his fate was, so to speak. So he had converted some of the guards. He was like on house arrest. They didn't want to kill him because it would start a riot, Christians, And maybe this is not verbatim, but he says, look, to live is Christ, to die is to gain. In other words, if I live, I'm going to keep on preaching the gospel. I'm going to be God's messenger. But if I die, I go to heaven to be with the Father. So we'll get back to, we won't stay on religion too long. This is a reason that I feel like Muslims feel like if they die in a suicide situation, they're martyrs and they'll go to heaven. And I'll leave religion alone out of it. But I just wanted to make those comparisons.
Yeah. A lot of people made those comparisons back then.
Yeah.
And that's just anything that you really remember that stood out to you that was a pivotal moment in your life where you said, I have to take up arms, I have to do something.
I was a young man, and of course I love reading. But when you came home to watch the evening news, what you saw was Bull Connors down there in Alabama and Georgia, and you saw policemen putting fire hoses on black people that were demonstrating and hitting women in the head and brutalizing blacks, slamming their head in the car. This is what you saw on the news, on the evening news. This is what was in the newspaper. So, you see this, and you're sensitive to the plight of your people. You relate to your own kind. Of course, you're always supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. It's one of the 10 Commandments. Treat your neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself. If you can treat your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself, you got a good chance of getting in, that along with some grace from God. But not by works are we getting in. But you relate to your own kind. Hispanics relate to Hispanics. Anglos relate to blacks relate to blacks. See, you can't, I think somebody perpetuated a myth